Welcome to my channel on the best of fantasy. Today I'm reviewing Ian C. Esslemont's Dancer's Lament. This is book 1 in Path to Ascendancy, which is a prequel series to Stephen Erikson's The Malazan Book of the Fallen and Esslemont's own novels of the Malazan Empire. So far there are 3 books out in Path to Ascendancy, with a 4th book coming out very soon, I hear. If you're familiar with the Malazan world, you probably know that Path to Ascendancy tells the story of certain individuals who are destined to play a, let's say, fairly major role in the Malazan Book of the Fallen. And Dancer's Lament is the beginning of this story, and it features a massive battle going on for possession of a city. It also has some underworld crime scenes and some rooftop assassin fights, as well as magic on an epic scale. This is my very first taste of Esslemont's writing, and I have read Stephen Erikson's The Malazan Book of the Fallen and reviewed it, and I realized a couple things when I finished that monumental series. One, this is unlike anything else I've ever read, and it's just brilliant. And two, there's a lot of stuff here I just don't understand. And so I knew that I was going to want to reread the Malazan Book of the Fallen. Before I decided to do that, I wanted to actually read all of the other stuff by Erikson and Esslemont in order to get a grip on the world of the Malazan Book of the Fallen. So I actually have already read and reviewed the 2 books that are out so far in Erikson's The Carcanis trilogy. And now I'm embarking on Esslemont's Path to Ascendancy, which is the prequel books. And I'm going to be moving on eventually to do my reread, reviewing each of the Malazan Book of the Fallen, each book in that series one at a time, and then doing a new video on the series as a whole. So this is part of a sort of ambitious project here for me. But I'm so happy to have read this book, Dancer's Lament, on its own, because it's really been a fun read. So the first thing I want to say about Dancer's Lament is that it's excellent. And I also want to say something that I don't know if this will be controversial or not, but I think that Path to Ascendancy, so far anyway, having just read Dancer's Lament, I think Path to Ascendancy could be an ideal entry into the Malazan world, and I'm going to explain why. First of all, the quality of the writing is very high, and the plot is actually quite tight, and it's a fairly easy book to follow. The perspective characters are limited basically to 3 main point of view characters. Now, this is unlike a typical Malazan book where you get lots of perspective characters. And another important point is that this is a book where the plot is localized to one city, Liheng, for the most part. There are a few things that happen outside of it, but for the most part, we're really in Liheng. All of this means that Dancer's Lament is a fairly gentle introduction to the Malazan world that succeeds in getting readers invested in some very key characters. That reader would then enter the Malazan Book of the Fallen with some geography under her belt, as well as familiarity with some characters and races and gods to help keep her anchored. And it might be a simpler story, but it's also a great introduction to the overall tone of the Malazan world. Now let's talk about those 3 perspective characters, who are really very important in and of themselves, but also for the characters that they're close to. The choice of the POV characters is actually quite brilliant here. And you see a similar thing in Erikson's books, because Erikson never writes with characters like Anomander Rake, for example, as the perspective character. Instead, what he does is he has other characters be the perspective character looking at these looming characters like Anomander Rake. And thereby he preserves the mysterious aura and the power around these characters. A similar sort of thing happens in Dancer's Lament. Esslemont presents us with some really wonderful character writing. He gives us complexity and conflict and flawed characters on opposing sides whom we root for and feel invested in. The first of these 3 perspective characters, and definitely the most important, perhaps the protagonist of this story, if you will, is Doran Rav, and he is a young assassin out to make a name for himself. He gets mixed up fairly early on with a mysterious character who gives the obviously fake name of Wu. And Wu is a young mage whose constant befuddlement belies an incredibly clever and ambitious mind. Doran's impressions of Wu become our impressions of him, and he is both impressed and vexed by him. And their interactions form some of the best comedy that you will find in the Malazan world, and that is saying a lot because there are some really wonderful comic moments in all of the books. They also get mixed up with a certain Sword of Hood, a very young and serious character named Dasim. And for Malazan fans, the interactions between these characters will absolutely delight. And for newcomers to the book, they'll really enjoy the dynamic between them. Also, Malazan fans will find a lot of Easter eggs in here and some cameos as well. And there are some interesting little tidbits like origins of certain names and like Dancer, for example, and the name of a certain group of assassins. The second of the three major point of view characters is Silk. He is one of the mages in the employ of Shalmanat, who is the ruler of Lihang. She's also called the Protectress. And Silk's view of the Protectress becomes our view as he becomes more and more familiar with her deep and mysterious past. Like many, or even most Malazan characters, Silk, who is initially quite vain, does not remain unchanged. In fact, like many of the other characters, he serves to bring out the familiar Malazan themes of empathy and compassion. The third major point of view character is Iko, and she is one of the elite female bodyguards of the king of Itko Khan, who has decided to annex the city of Lihang into his territory, which is what gives the book the backdrop to its plot. Now, Iko begins with a very simple and unwavering dedication to her monarch. But the story initiates her into a world much more complex than the simple morals of an obedient soldier. And this happens through the baptism of fire that is the story. And finally, I want to make a couple points about the humor and the style here. It's not fair to compare anyone to Steven Erikson, who is probably one of the greatest fantasy writers out there. And besides that, really, Esslemont stands on his own as an accomplished writer of fantasy. But I do want to point out that in Dancer's Lament, Erikson's readers will find a style that meshes really well with the Malazan Book of the Fallen. And especially, I would say this in the areas of humor and the themes that I just alluded to. There's an ease of reference and a playfulness with the characters that marks Esslemont as a co-creator of this world. As for themes, I already mentioned compassion, and there are some truly poignant moments in this book where we learn the price of ambition. I'm incredibly excited to continue Path to Ascendancy for its own sake, and also as part of my preparation, my gearing up for my reread of the Malazan Book of the Fallen, as well as this time around, I'm going to include Esslemont's novels of the Malazan Empire. But next up, I'm going to be switching gears a little bit, and I'm going to be taking on Book 2 of the Dresden Files. Full Moon is my next book, which I hope to have finished and reviewed the next few days, and I hope you'll join me for that as well. Until next time.